to do first was talk about the definition of employment services and what they're for. Employment services are formerly known as supported employment. This is a waiver service for people who experience intellectual developmental disability who are also of working age, so that people may receive supports to be employed in the community setting alongside individuals who are not getting services, so regular community employment. It could also be for self-employment, and it is a habilitative service, which is for teaching and skill building. It is our habilitative services do include personal care, but as such, our habilitative services are not requested solely for the purpose of the personal care aspect. So if a person needs care like that during their employment, then employment services staff could provide it, but it is not requested for the purpose of that care. The mind frame here really is just to know that employment services are not a sheltered workshop. It's not an isolating setting in any way. It's not, cutting the person off from the regular employment place. It's not a set apart place from where others may not work. And we have new regulations that kind of tell you a little bit more about what it is and other options for the setting of work, for example, self-employment, and we'll get into that in just a bit here. First, I wanted to show us our new regulation document, and it's a little bit interesting. I always share this when we have new regs come out. Let me move it in a little bit here for us, and then after we do this, I'll do the PowerPoint part. So let me see if it's going to be nice to me here or not. It's going to be nice or not. Let's see. All right. Let me find a different place to find it, okay? Let me find a different version of that, and then I'll show that. All right, try this. Okay, better. The documents regulations really do come out written like this, and they're interesting because they have a lot of notations on them. They have a lot of initials and things like that. So you can see before they go into the register, the federal, I'm sorry, not the regulation register, not we go into our state regulation register. They come out like this onto a PDF, and it tells you the effective date, and it tells a bit about what led up to this with our regulation process. It has signatures, and this is how you can tell it's a final signed reg. And then after a certain point of time, the register gets updated so that you can actually look these up online. Okay, so this is effective September 9th. And then at some point after that, they'll be available online. Okay, you can see that it has a seal. And then when we get down to the language part, I'm not going to just read these out. I have prepared a summary for us in a PowerPoint, and so that's what we're going to look at and discuss today. But we do have a copy of this in your handout section, and I'll send you a copy of this after the session so that you can have it and you can read it too. One of the interesting things about regulations is the capital letters are deleted. The different segments of regs are often amended and then sometimes repealed and readopted. So this regulation has quite a bit of repealed and readopted language. So I usually like to compare the old to the new. I kind of have a little bit of that here for you in the PowerPoint part, but the old to the new, there's quite a bit of new here is what I'm trying to say. So as you can see, there's capitalized letters. The main thing to think about right now is that supported employment is now employment services. So there's a name change where supported employment is now employment services. And you'll see a whole lot of that in the bulk of this document. And there's little pieces of citation here, or there are citations here, which tell you where to find the the wording employment services as it replaces supported employment. And so believe it or not, employment services is in a lot of different regs and kind of referenced around in different places. So that's what that means. There's a lot of space and citations devoted to that. So this is an example of where it's amended by adding a new subsection. So there's new language here, okay? And we'll talk about this in our PowerPoint coming up, because that's new language and a new option for this particular regulation. Okay, so if you kind of just go down to the bottom, I'll stop scrolling at this point, and I just know that we'll send this to you. You know, it has a whole lot of info about where the language supported employment used to live, and now it's going to be turned into employment services. So basically, that is, I just wanted us to get a look at the regulation document and how it comes out. It shouldn't be a big surprise when you see it, since you've gone through it here with me real briefly like this. I want to move to my regular PowerPoint and start showing us that from a particular slide. So just give me one sec here and I'll get that ready. And so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce us to employment services in the wording of our regulation with a summary of the different pieces that are different or new, you know, or amended. We'll do this presentation and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. And just know too that if we get a lot of Q&A that I may have to ask for other staff to give me some information about, you know, what your answer might be. I might end up emailing you back. There may be off-topic questions and things like that. Just know that all of your questions are welcome. Hopefully many of them will be answered by this particular presentation. At least they're basic questions, okay? So anyway, go ahead and fill in your questions as we go, and we'll stop. And this is a fairly short presentation. We'll kind of collect them and we'll go for it at the end and do the best we can with our Q&A. Okay, so our first slide here just says supported employment. This is a name change for this service now to employment services. You'll see the name change in our conditions of participation, which is just an instructional document that that shows, sorry, apologize for that, an instructional document that shows that that it tells the provider how to work the employment services. Okay, so our employment services conditions of participation have the same authority as regulation. Our regulation changes, of course, cite that new phrase of employment services. The new part about employment services that they are newly available while out of the community. You may recall some of our waiver services are available to the person while they're out of the community for over 24 hours, yet or traveling within the states. The supported employment has been added to that because people may need to travel for work. So that's one of the new things about our new regulations. Personal care services, or CFC, Community First Choice personal care services, are available at the place of employment for the family habilitation group home recipient, if separate from the home. An individual supported employment is available, or a group of 2 to 5 recipients. We haven't previously had a definition of number of recipients for a group, so it does exist in these regs. For the summary includes that it's for individuals with the CCMC, IDD, ISW, or APDD waivers who are of working age. If a person is under 22, it would need to explain how it is different from school. School does have an obligation to the individual to work on employment services that are part of their transitional services. and it is available for self-employment, newly available for self-employment. Okay. For self-employment, in a support plan, for example, the plan would need to explain how the expected income is like similar to a person who doesn't happen to experience a disability who is self-employed. It would need to comply with our all of support employment needs, or I'm sorry, employment services needs to comply with federal regulation limiting sub-minimum wage. Planning for employment services needs to be person-centered and using decreasing amounts over time as the person meets their goals. The purpose of this mentioning the decreasing over time as the person meets their goals is we realize that many people will need services ongoing. So people will still need help through for their employment. It's just that what we'd like to see happen, or what we need to see happen, is for the services to help the person achieve their goals over time. So as a person decreases need for support in one area, if they continue to need support in a different area, that would be something that we would portray in the plan. So it needs to have a result for that person, for the outcome being that they decrease amounts of support and employment, and hopefully, as we've heard from people who want to receive this service, the person will become more and more independent. Of course, it's different for every person. So some people may need different amounts, and their achievement of their goals will look different for each individual. And the expected outcome of our employment services is to be gainfully employed, getting paid at or above the minimum wage, i.e. the same money for the same work as other workers do. So employment services still includes pre-employment. Pre-employment is a piece of employment services that provides support to work towards work readiness, non-job specific skills, assistance to determine a person's strengths or interests. In our regulation, it says 3 months total available for pre-employment services in a lifetime, a waiver lifetime, if you will. There are certain exceptions to that, though, and we'll go over that in just a little bit. And pre-employment is to be provided in a setting that is helpful to the person's needs. Perhaps, at an employment setting, a person could undergo some pre-employment. It assists the person to become gainfully employed, and for a person who's self-employed, it can help to determine a concept or plan and give referral to additional guidance for that person's business. So supported employment provides training to carry out job duties. This is going to be outside of what the employer provides. Each employer is required to provide a certain amount of training for people to do their job. So supported employment is outside of that. It can do direct support to help a person remain employed and help them stabilize if there was a change in their job circumstances to help prevent job loss. It is support for helping the person take the most advantage of the hours they work, maximize their pay, their benefits, and their career advancement. And of course, help the person accomplish work-related goals, and the amount of support employment would decrease, or different goals would be addressed as time goes on and the person achieves their particular goal, or goals as the case may be. New wording in our employment services regulation also includes wording to assist a person to become self-employed. Self-employment can include subsistence activities. And employment services needs to identify supports that are needed to operate a business or self-employment, provide some ongoing support after the business starts. Okay, so this is just summarizing the flow, if you will, of the document. And next up, I have a definition of subsistence activities right from the reg, so that you can, of course, you can read it when when you have a copy. You can go over this more in depth. But it is new, so subsistence, meaning a form of self-employment where a person will produce using a culturally relevant and traditional method goods or services that are mostly consumed by their own household or used for non-commercial trade or barter. That is a part or an important part or a basis of the person's livelihood. Okay, it says a form of self-employment that is subsistence and culturally relevant to American Indian or Alaska Native tribes may include the exchange of fish caught, crops raised by the individual with a disability for other goods produced by other members of the tribe that the individual needs to live and maintain their home. So the regulation goes further into what it doesn't cover. Usually you'll see that our regs have, what is covered and what is not covered. Here it says, it doesn't cover supervision and training that the employer would give to all employees. All right, it's not workplace accommodations for the person's disability. The employer would be responsible for that. It is not going to be both employment services and pre-employment at the same time. Okay, so one or the other. It wouldn't be more than 3 months of pre-employment unless the person's needs have changed. Maybe they have a health-related event that, meant that they needed to receive more training, and they have a decline in abilities, and perhaps that would help them. If a person's needs have changed, that could be part of that request. Perhaps they need to prepare for a new job and they need new skills, or perhaps their employment was interrupted by an incarceration or hospitalization. Employment services does not cover expenses to start a business. It does not cover transportation unless to or from the employment site and there is no other transportation available. So a support plan would need to explain that. Employment services, like all other waiver services, are not duplication of school-related services, IDEA, or vocational rehabilitation services, or other community employment support, regardless of the funding source. And as we have throughout the years stated, open a case with DVR before requesting employment services. And that doesn't include people who are already receiving supported employment or employment services, yet they hadn't, it's historic, they hadn't gone through DVR before. We're not saying to stop and go back, but traditionally or generally, the person would open a case with DVR before requesting employment services. It also does not cover incentives for employers. It is not payment that passes through the person. It doesn't cover services that don't result in goal achievement and progress. And it does not cover services in a residential setting unless it's self-employment or subsistence or a work from home agreement is in place with their employer. Okay, so this is one of my sort of last slides here. I'm just encouraging us to think outside the box and think about what employment can be, and just to work with the people we serve in terms of helping people live the life they choose with the supports they direct, and how great employment services can be. We are an employment first state. So we want to support people's desire to become employed and become as independent as possible. And so my summary is concluded, and I am moving to my Q&A. part now. I'm going to go up to the top of our questions, and I am going to read my questions. And if I do not have, if I don't read your particular question, don't worry. It's usually because a lot of people ask the same question. So I'll be able to kind of get the themes. And as is always the case with us here at SDS, if we have many, many questions and we need to have other, more webinars and things like that, we're always happy to accommodate that in terms of getting the word out and helping people understand more about this. So I'm hoping that you have a new understanding of employment services as happening is in effect after the 9th of September. And my first question here says, is the CPT code going to stay the same for billing purposes? It's a really good question. I don't have information to yes or no for that. I have not heard that it would change. I think probably the best place to ask that question would be Conduent. We could ask that question of Conduent or MedicaidAlaska.com. They'd have provider question about their training there, or perhaps their billing and coding and things like that. Okay, it says, will the PCS department update their regulations due to EVV being in place to capture information in place of a daily signature or initial? Adding supported employment with PCS and PCS with EVV will be very complicated. Is PCS going to be time for task and assessed at I think I ran out of room there, needs assessed. Okay, so my best general answer here is that PCS, when they assess, or CFC PCS, if a person needs personal care services while on the job, there's a piece of that in the assessment. So whatever is in the service level authorization for that person is what is going to be in place. So employment services is not going to be billed at the same time as personal care services. The intent of that is for a person who is independent on the job versus, so they're independent on the job with the job task. They just need the personal care services, yet they live in a family hub home or a group home. Okay, so they're not going to be billing for both. So EVV, we do have the EVV staff who we could ask certain, questions to about how EVV will work about that. But I think what I'm saying is that it's not going to be different than what it is at this time. Okay. All right. Let me get to my questions here. All right. So, like I said, supported employment is not provided at the same time as personal care. It just allows for personal care to be accessed by the person if they live in a group home or a family hub home. Our previous regs disallowed that. So the person is not going to be receiving supported employment at the same time as PCS. They just changed it so that they could have PCS, and if they live in the group home or family hub and they need that while they're on the job, and that the job is not, in the home, or self-employment in the home. Right? Questions about how people can get jobs and how they need assistance. Division of Vocational Rehab does a lot of work in helping people with different assessments that they could take advantage of prior to employment. They can help people with job search and things like that. It is the basic difference between vocational rehab and employment services is the DVR is short-term services, so there could be some job coaching for a while, but for long-term services, it would be supported employment meeting those needs. Question says, is pre-employment in lieu of DVR? We were told that DVR must occur prior to waivered services. No, pre-employment is not in lieu of that. Pre-employment is like, it's waiver service for somebody who's in the long-term supports and services piece of their journey through work. DVR is before that. I highly encourage people to open a case with DVR. It's very, that's why they're there, is to help a person who experiences a disability get a job, keep a job, or go back to work. And so they can offer different things like benefits counseling and certain trainings and things like that. So I think that it would be a good thing if a person hasn't done that to explore DVR. Okay. What happens if the person needs the help to do their job, no matter what kind of goals are defined in the plan of care? I think probably my best answer to this is that a person should be encouraged to do as much they can, or supported to do as much as they are able to do and want to pursue doing in a job. I think that you might be referring to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of course, people who qualify for high levels of support, people who are needing, the support of staff to complete tasks. What we're hoping to do is have people grow those strengths so that they can add to their toolbox, if you will, and their abilities on the job, and to hopefully see some creative answers where if people are doing a piece of a task, maybe a different person could also work alongside as somebody who does, maybe is a job share, where two people work on a job and they're both doing the same thing, but one is doing part of one, and one is doing one part and the other is doing another part. And that's just one example of a creative answer that I think might work for some people. We are hoping to see people, start where they are and be supported to gain and grow in their strengths. And we realize that there are going to be pieces of the work that the person is going to strive for, but yet it's required to be done. And so we're just hoping to see these kinds of proposals on plans where we're growing people's strengths. And that means we're including everybody who, of course, qualifies for the waiver and has the service in their waiver, hoping to grow skills and strengths and start where people are. What does some support mean in terms of hours, scope, and duration? That is best answered by describing the individual's abilities and describing the support needed to accomplish the task. Describing mostly the supports needed, that's kind of where you're going to get to that, and how long that would take, and what that would look like. What happens if the goals are the same because they need the help the entire work time? It's hard to say. I think that probably to propose propose. I think my best answer to that is to describe the supports. What will the supports be doing to help the person accomplish their goal, to help the person be more independent, and really give that accurate picture of the supports. And then it will sort of make more sense the length of time it takes. And I think that we're talking about people who do qualify for high levels of support. So that is a person who could do supported employment. And so we're hoping to have those articulated in our plans, and so we can make a good call and make a good understanding of what the staff will do and what the person is going to be supported to do, and how that's going to lead to eventual some piece of goal achievement and comprehension and perhaps some independence. And that could be something that we tend to look at jobs. It's interesting because when we talk about jobs, it's like we think a lot about independence and being on your own and doing your thing, and work is work, and we have to be busy and we have to do all these things. People who need supports are going to be supported to do what they can do, and then to strive to do more. And so it's going to look a little different. It's not it's more so emphasis on the supports needed and looking at those incremental achievements as along the way, and not because a person can't do the whole thing. You know, that's not the of course everybody wants to be able to do the whole thing, but if a person is needing supports along the way, we're going to look at what they're doing and how they're being supported to do that, and look at how they're growing and hopefully grow. Question says, for subsistence, does the person have to be Native American or Native Alaskan to utilize? You know, there's nothing that says that a person has to be Native American or Native Alaskan to utilize a subsistence. It just has to be subsistence. Okay. So I know in our support plans, we do have a piece where we ask if the person identifies as a Native American, Native Alaskan. We really like to get that information because it helps us apply, or helps us receive a little bit more, or it helps us receive more drawdown from our federal resource in order to, you know, fund the program and help that person. So, but no, there's nothing that says they have to be. Can I describe what supervisory activities that we're not paying for? Yes, that would be what an employer does, like their employee supervision, their employee meetings, you know, their supervisory activities that they do for that person when they go over the rules of the job, things that an employer does. There's a couple questions about accommodations for an employer. You know, an employer can make a workplace accommodation for an individual with a disability as long as it's a reasonable accommodation. Um, Simple ones that I can think of off the top of my head are like a magnifying device for a computer screen so the person can see. Things that are devices that where the person can perceive their work better. Those things are sometimes part of what an employer would do. It's a whole nother set. That's a whole nother, you know, workplace accommodations is like a whole nother world, and not a waiver reg book. It's a wage and hour labor ADA workbook, reg book. Does employment services cover providers assisting during new hire training? Um, you know, new hire training is something that is part of what a provider what a employer would do for their person. I think that my best answer to that would be to describe the supports that are given so the person can engage in that training, in that new hire training. What is incentives for employers? Okay, incentives, so employment services are not incentives to an employer to employ a person with a disability. Like it's not a payment to them. It's not like a, you know, hey, you're going to get paid this much if a person with a waiver is employed there. Okay, so it's not that. It's pretty simple. It's ongoing long-term services and supports for a person to be able to get help to work at their job and to reach their goals, and you know, learn more and be more comprehensive within their job skills. Are there any new regulations regarding certification for staff providing employment services? Not to my knowledge, we don't have that. This is just employment services overall for the service itself. Can a person have a combination of regular employment services hours and subsistence hours? I don't know why they wouldn't. I would probably encourage us to flip it and think of it in terms of how the person is going to be supported for their, you know, to provide for themselves through an employment effort, be it subsistence or, I guess, you know, a job style, work for your money to buy your food. So I think I would probably flip it and not think of it in terms of hours like that, and just think about the generation of that and what the person really needs to accomplish their life and what that's going to be for them, what that looks like for that person. Okay. A person does not have to go to DVR if they went long ago, say 10 years. No, if they already have employment services and they haven't gone to DVR, we don't say to go back and do it over. However, a person is welcome to consult with DVR at any time. They do have different services that can help people. Like I keep talking about benefits counseling and things like that. And I get a lot of comments, and people don't understand their benefits, and they're afraid that if they work, they might lose their waiver and things like that. Those are things that DVR can help with. So, I mean, I always encourage it because they're great and that's what they're there for. Some of the questions I really don't have time for right now. There's a question that says, can you review changes in requirements for service providers as it relates to required trainings? I don't have changes in certification requirements in this regulation that I'm presenting right now today. But I'll certainly log in all of your questions. They're all valid questions. It's great to know what's on your mind so we can get our further trainings out and more information out to you. A lot of questions about training for staff that are going to provide support or employment services. Please let me get back to you on that, okay? I'm going to do a little research about that. Let me make a note so that I can get good information for you. And I see that there's a need for us to, to do some outreach. So let's do that. I'm just writing it down real quick. Employment services training for staff. Thank you so much for all these questions, by the way, it's great. Okay, so if a person lives in a group home, can they get transportation services like by cab to get to and from work? Or is group home all inclusive to include transportation? If a person wants to pay for their cab and get a cab to work, that's fine. Group home generally includes transportation because it's, what a person needs during the day. For different purposes, they may have other kinds of transportation. Generally for work, you know, I'm responsible to get myself to work. Other people are responsible to get themselves to work. So public transportation could be part of it. And if not part of it, and the person wants to request transportation, they'd have to portray that in the regulation. All right. Let's see. Thank you for all your questions. Again, there's a question that says, will PCS be assessed at the job site? No, not. Currently, we're doing assessments remote. It's going to be allocated per their service level authorization during their assessment, wherever their assessment occurs. That's my best answer. Will we have to submit amendments on planned care already approved under an old category? No, that is my best answer. Can the PCS provider be the employment services provider also, or do they need to be different providers? Well, it's a great question. If the agency is certified and enrolled to do both, then I suppose the person could buy the service of support, employment services and PCS from that company. It may or may not be the case. If the client is independent on the job and needs help with ADLs and have decreased employment services, will they just go on PCA? That is, yes and no. The person could potentially receive PCA during that employment time. They need to apply for PCA and get PCS services, personal care services. It wouldn't be a matter of just going on it. But since personal care is available on the job, then they could. I am going to get rid of that. Sorry. Okay. Would pre-employment be appropriate if the person is not eligible for DVR? It really depends. I mean, we want to see the person go through DVR and work with DVR if DVR determines that they're not going to serve that person, then they could request pre-employment possible. All right. Will we provide information? Hang on, I'm just looking here real quick. I'm just opening my panel so I can see it better. Still here? So yeah, we're hoping to get information out to individuals and families about the changes. Care coordinators can definitely help us do that. Care coordinators should be prepared to talk to individuals and families about these changes. The next question says, what are the exceptions for extending a 3-month limit on pre-employment? Pre-employment, it was in our presentation. Pre-employment is more so about training for skills for a new job. Perhaps a person was incarcerated or in the hospital and they needed more length of time for pre-employment. Skills that are not just related to the job itself, and other kinds of work readiness skills. So that's what pre-employment is, but it has to be something that interrupted the person's, engagement with employment or with pre-employment. Maybe they would have had a health change or something like that, where they would need more pre-employment to perhaps relearn skills. Question says, is this technically supported employment with just a name change? Not really. It does have some new pieces to it. It has, of course, the PCS available, and there's several different new pieces of this. So it's not just solely the name change, although the name change is part of it. Okay, lots of questions. I'm up to about 10 minutes to the end here, so I may or may not be able to get to all your questions. I'll do my best here to get to your questions. What is the documentation required to ensure that we're adhering to supported employment plan? Conditions of participation mentioned defined evidence-informed methodology. So your documentation for supported for employment services, it should show what the person did. It should show their tasks that they're pursuing. It should show the supports that are given, and it should show if there was progress. So I think probably we have a lot of questions about that. We probably have to do further outreach for defining documentation and what training is and what the supports look like, what they do, what their actions are during supported employment. Okay. Good question. For folks who have employment services now and are working in a group setting with more than 5 people, is there a plan to grandfather people into those job sites? So I have not, I don't have a sense that, wouldn't be employment services if that was the case. But it's a really good question. So I'll leave that for perhaps the FAQ or to get back with you on that. I appreciate that question quite a bit. What happens if the person cannot do the job by working with others together because their job is beyond the skill level, skill set, and/or education of the others? You know, my best answer here is that we're hoping to see proposals on employment services plans so that we can understand more about how that service will help that person. Again, the example of others is not the be all and end all. Okay, it's just an example and an idea. So we're hoping to see some creative solutions here to help people have employment services and help people grow their skills where they are. An individual who is 22 or younger cannot get employment services if they're in ACT program or still school eligible. No, that is not the case. They could potentially receive employment services, but the plan has to tell how it's different than school. For example, if it's an after school job or a weekend job or something like that. Okay, I'm checking our questions here. Questions about, if you're getting ready to turn in a renewal for a plan and the supported employment, do I need to change the name of that in the service block? My best thought there is that if that's the way it is at this moment, that you wouldn't need to change it, but just for something that starts after the new regs are in effect, you would go ahead and change. You would go ahead and use the new, not change it, you would use the new one. All right, going down to the end here. Lots of questions about decreasing services. So the point of that, the idea and the intent of that is that, we realize that people will need supports. Many people will need supports throughout the lifespan, and we're wanting to see people identify goals on their job and reach them, and decrease supports perhaps for goals that have been reached. Okay, it's not decreasing overall. Of course, we would love to see people, be independent and have less supported employment or employment services throughout the years. And this is also for people who want that. People do want to be independent on the job. But it is also the case that we know that people will continue to need support. So we're hoping to see plans come in that have proposals like that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and there's a comment about exceptions. Yes, the exceptions are defined in the regulation, and it's not just simply that the person could benefit from more time. It has to be certain circumstances about that. Okay. Um, Something that is new in our conditions of participation is that within 1 year of employment, the employment services specialist must receive and maintain documentation in their employee record of the national certification in employment services or an equivalent certification in employment services. Okay. One of the new things. Okay, so it's about 4 minutes till. I do have some themes here about the conditions of participation and our agencies asking questions about that, about what their requirements are. Um, any other last minute questions here? I think what I'll best be able to help you is to look into that and develop some responses. send you the materials, and we can email and perhaps set up another session of some kind regarding the conditions of participation. And the question related to the update is existing employees, do they have a grace period for certification? Okay, so that's a great question. Again, I don't have an answer for that right now. Okay. Okay. So once again, thanks everybody for your participation here today. I really appreciate it, and very thankful for your questions here. Um, I really get your themes. I know that there's concerns about our conditions of participation, and wanting to outreach to individuals and families regarding the new regulations and employment services training. And so I hear that you need a follow-up training about the conditions of participation. Today was just an introduction of our regulations. So, but I always love it when I can get more information out, and I get to know what's on your mind, just so that we can consult with our teams and get back with you about what that is. Okay. And I thank you greatly for your comments and your ideas. And we'll go ahead and call it a session. So stay tuned for further outreach. We'll put this information together. We'll hopefully get the word out and be able to visit with you again with another webinar about our conditions of participation. And take care and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye for now.